to introduce our next illustrious speaker of the session. Over to Professor Preetham.
Thank you, ma'am. I feel immensely privileged to introduce our next speaker of the session, Juan Manuel Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez is the Executive Director of Engineer por Mexico with more than 8 years of experience managing international projects in the public and private sectors. He began his career as a business consultant at Deloitte. For 6 years, he served several clients in high-impact projects. Juan Manuel graduated with a bachelor's in business administration from Texas A&M University and with 2 master's degrees from Stanford University, one in business and one in education. Additionally, he obtained a certificate in public management and social innovation from Stanford University. Juan Manuel was born in Guadalajara, Jalisco. He lived there until the age of 14, then he moved to the United States in search of better educational opportunities. After spending 14 years outside Mexico, Juan Manuel returned to the country to become the Executive Director of Engineer por Mexico. He is passionate about education and dreams that one day all Mexicans will have access to an education that allows them to develop their full potential. Dear sir, it gives us immense pleasure to welcome you to deliver your views. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure for me to join this conference, this summit. I am very excited to share with you what it's like to lead an education nonprofit, focusing on the entrepreneurial skills that you will need in the education sector. I hope that many of you are considering starting a social organization or a nonprofit. So like my idea is to share with you what it's like to do. Of course, I cannot share all the details of many things, but I'm gonna focus on 3 main things, which is like what it's like to fundraise for a nonprofit, what is to attract and retain the best talent. And the last one is a board. How do you build a strong board? At the end of the day, they are the ones that can help you to increase your fundraising capabilities. But I am so happy to be here, and I'll be sharing my screen. So as Preetham say, I'm the Executive Director of Enseña por Mexico, and it is my dream job. So I'm gonna share with you my screen. So please let me know when you see it. There you go. You see it, right? Give me a thumbs up or something.
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Perfect. So it is a pleasure for me to be talking about this, is because leading a nonprofit was something that I envisioned and thought about like since I was 20 years old. That after I started to work at Deloitte, I started to think like I was very privileged to have had a good education. And it was my time to think, how could I help other Mexicans in particular to have a great quality education? I'm gonna give you a little introduction of my journey in general, because I think it's important and it connects of the reason why I'm working now in the nonprofit sector. So my story starts with my parents. My parents are from a small community in Michoacan, which is one of the 32 states in Mexico, and a community with very limited resources. In fact, my mother never learned to read and write, and my father never had any formal education. So they moved to Guadalajara, which is in another state of Mexico, but is one of the largest cities of Mexico, a few years before I was even born. So in my case, I was born and raised in a city where there were more access to more educational opportunities. Even though in the neighborhood where I grew up in Guadalajara, there was a high crime rate, there were many problems, it was better than the communities that my parents were raised. So I took advantage of that. I always became very passionate about learning and education. And I'm the youngest out of 8 siblings. So I have 7 siblings, so a big family. So my father didn't have enough money to provide to us in Mexico. So he will always immigrate to the United States, as I have recollection. So given the USA is so close to Mexico, is one of the countries where many Mexicans, especially those ones that didn't have access to good opportunities in Mexico, go to the United States, work there, and then come back to Mexico for a few months and then go back to the United States. So that was the story of my life. And when I was 14 years old, my father tells me, why don't you come to the United States with me? You learn English, and then once you know English, probably more doors are gonna open and you can go back to Mexico and do whatever you want to. So I took that offer. But instead of just learning English, I wanted to go further. I was like, I cannot just stop on learning the language and don't just be done. So I decided that I was gonna develop more skills to obtain good grades to be accepted to a university in the United States. And that's what I did. So I focused very hard in high school, and luckily I obtained a scholarship to attend Texas A&M University, where I studied supply chain management. And after Texas A&M University, I decided to start my career as a management consultant at Deloitte Consulting. So the main reason, I'll be very transparent, that I joined Deloitte, it was because it was the company from my university in specific that gave you the better offers money-wise. They're the ones that paid the most from my university. So I was like very ambitious, and given my background, I wanted to get out of this poverty environment that I had grew up. So I decided I was gonna get a job at Deloitte no matter what because of that. But luckily, only 2 years after being at Deloitte, I started to notice when I will go back to Guadalajara and see my family, some friends that I grew up with, that their history had been very different to mine just because of education. So like in my case, like I was having this very good job, living in a nice house in Houston, Texas, while going back to Guadalajara in the neighborhood that I was born. Many of my friends had been incarcerated because they got involved with drug dealing. Many of them have been killed. Many of even my family members were in the same situation. And that's where I started to wonder, why am I not doing something to change this? Why am I just focusing on myself, having a nice job, living in the United States? And that's when my entrepreneurial aspect started to become to life. And I decided that I needed to go back to Mexico at some point and to dedicate my life to education, to provide access to quality education. So every Mexican, no matter where they have been born, they will have the opportunities to have a great life. So I started to do my research. How can I do this? Of course, coming from a lower socioeconomic status, I didn't have the money to start a nonprofit. So from scratch on my own. So I started to think, how can I do this? And first I was like, I need the entrepreneurship skills. So I need to find somewhere where I can develop. And number two, I need the education knowledge. I have been working on business most of the time, even though I have volunteered as a teacher many years, I still had not many theory pedagogy behind like my knowledge of education. And last one, it was the network. I was like, I don't have the money to do this nonprofit, so I need to find somewhere to create a network where I can fundraise this money. So I decided, well, after doing my research, that the perfect place to obtain those skills for me was Stanford University. Stanford University had this program in which you could do an MBA that had a strong focus on entrepreneurship, but at the same time, I could do a master's in education. So I was like, this is the best world. This is the best of both worlds for me. And then at the same time, like it was a place where very elite Mexicans will go. And that was my access. This is the people that I need to do my fundraising for the nonprofit. So I was like, I need to be accepted to this university no matter what. So I created this vision 1.5 years before I got accepted into the university. But I remember a lot of people telling me, and this is something that you're gonna confront as an entrepreneur, telling you that you cannot do it, that it is impossible what you're thinking. And that's what happens for me. Like, I think like getting to Stanford, I had a lot of people telling me, this is only for the elite. You don't have, you don't come from a private university, you won't get in. At the end of the day, I say like, no matter what, they're gonna accept me. And so I created this plan and they accept me. And Stanford was that place where literally I developed those skills that I told you that I was looking to develop: the entrepreneurial side, the education knowledge, and also the access to the network that I needed. and it was perfect. I loved it so much. And after Stanford, given that I was at Deloitte and they had given me a scholarship to go to Stanford, I had to return for 2 years. But after Deloitte, my plan to start to work in education in Mexico started to come together. After spending 14 years outside of Mexico, I found this organization that had already been developed. It had already 7 years of being operating, but it was still at an early stage, you could say, in many aspects. And that's what called my attention. So after many interviews, because this is also another challenge that I found, was that the board members of Teach for Mexico will be like, why would you want to come back to Mexico to make less money than you're making in the United States, to have a job that is more hard than the one that you're doing? And I was like, I want to do it because I have this passion for education and I want to help many Mexicans like myself to have a good education. And after 9 interviews, I cannot believe that I had to go through 9 interviews, but I guess I was not convincing them until finally, after 9 interviews, they tell me, you are the person that I think we want you to take over, over the CEO that have founded the Teach for Mexico, and to continue to develop the organization. And I was so happy. This was on November of 2018. I quit my job on Deloitte on November 3rd, and I started on November 5th at Enseña por Mexico, and it has been an amazing journey, very challenging, and that's what I'm about to share with you. But I think I want to summarize, like, I think part of the story, or like as an entrepreneur, I do believe that you have to truly believe on what you're doing, and if it is connected in some personal way to you, you're gonna do it no matter what. You're gonna try to push that organization to be the best organization. And for me, education is what matters the most to me. And it had to do because it gave me access to things that I never thought that I would have access to. And that is the reason why it became so important to me, to now that I had that privilege to use the knowledge that I have developed throughout the years through my education to now help other Mexicans do it. So I joined Enseña por Mexico, and one of our key phrases is origen no es destino, which means origin is not destination. And it has to do with the fact that many Mexicans, like my parents, do not have access to a good education, and these create barriers to access other opportunities that will allow them to develop their full potential. So that is the thing, that the main reason why I joined Teach for Mexico, because it connected with this vision that I have when I was 20 years old about creating this nonprofit that will help Mexicans have a better education. And you probably heard of Teach for India, so we are an equivalent of that in Teach for Mexico. But just for you to have a reference of what we do. But the reason we exist is because we believe that developing leadership, we can change an entire system. So what we do, we pretty much work with the public and the private sector to create a movement to ending educational inequity through the collaborations in schools in the most vulnerable communities. What we do, we recruit top talented individuals to join our program, which is a 2-year full-time program. And their goal is to go to these communities and to find ways to develop leadership in these communities and to find opportunities that will help students to have access to better education. They also teach, of course, and they do this through this 2-year program. But at the end of the day, our end goal is that these people, this top talent, is gonna fall in love so much with education that even after their commitment of 2 years is completed, they will wanna continue to go on for longer. And it happens. More than 70% of the entire Teach for All network continues in education, even though they come from many careers. And in Mexico in particular, is more than 80% of our fellows. continue in the education sector. Right now, we are part of this global network called Teach for All, present in 61 countries. The main objective is collaborating for a world where educators, governments, families, and students work together to guarantee that children in their communities have the foundations they need to shape a better future for themselves and for all of us. So that's the reason why we exist. In Mexico, give you a perspective, this is the map of Mexico. We are currently in 10 out of the 32 states of Mexico. We have impacted more than 120,000 students directly through 9 cohorts of fellows. 583 fellows have completed our program, and we currently have 225 fellows in 184 schools in these 10 states of Mexico. Something innovative about Teach for Mexico is that we are one of the first countries in the Teach for All network to start placing fellows in early childhood. That happened in 2018 when I joined the organization. And there is something that I want to highlight. Even when you join an organization that is already established, you are always needed to think, what else can we do to continue to help or to fulfill the needs of our customers? In the case of Enseña por Mexico, we call them beneficiaries or people that we're impacting. But like thinking about, like, there was also the opportunity to go into the helping students in early childhood centers and preschools was something that was very innovative in Teach for Mexico, because the whole Teach for All network have focused just on from first grade to the 12th grade of education, but we decided that there was the opportunity to take this program in early childhood, and we did it. And locally now, other 8 countries are doing the same. But I want to highlight that there is an opportunity to, even though you already have an established program, to always think, how can I continue to grow this program and develop new models to take this opportunity to the next level? And that's what we did. But like, one of the things that you need to develop as a nonprofit leader and also as a private leader is fundraising. And I'm gonna focus more here on the fundraising aspect of the nonprofit sector. But like in my case, as the executive director of Teach for Mexico, one of my main jobs is always asking for donations. 70% of my time is spent on talking to very high network individuals, to companies, to my own friends, and asking them to join my movement by donating to this organization. But I want to share with you some statistics that are like to let you see how challenging it is to do this in Mexico, because the philanthropy culture is not as developed as in other places. And in here in particular, I compare it to the United States, so you have a reference. But if we compare like what it's like to donate in Mexico, in 2020, Mexican nonprofits received 2.67 USD in donations, representing only a 0.25% of GDP. And if we compare it to the United States, there were 471.44 billion. Of course, the US is a bigger economy, so you expect more donations. But when you compare it in terms of GDP, Americans donate 2.25% of the GDP, and in Mexico, it's only 0.25. So it gives you a perspective that the culture of donating in Mexico is still not as developed. So if you want to fundraise in Mexico, you're confronting a biggest challenge, because you have to change the mindset of people to donate to you. And also I put the different people, the different groups that donate. In Teach for Mexico in particular, only 12% of our donations come from individuals. In the United States, it's 69%. So it's a big difference. And for me, that is the biggest example that the culture of donating is not developed. But something that I have learned in Mexico is that the reason it's not as developed is because there is a lot of mistrust in nonprofits in Mexico, because unfortunately, For many years, there were many nonprofits that were just developed to evade taxes, avoid taxes. And so the many Mexicans developed this mistrust. So one of my main jobs as a fundraising in nonprofit in Mexico is to gain the trust of individuals. So for that reason, I want to share with you 2 frameworks that I use to make sure that I gain this trust of individuals and foundations, and I raise the money that I need to continue to operate my program. And one of the models is to actually create a great organization. How do you actually build a great organization? Is to pretty much you need to have a good processes, same as any other organizations. You need to have a good team. You need to have a good support system, like a good board. So you need to build a robust organization. Then you also need to focus on and know your donors. You need to make sure that you know, same as in the private sector, you need to know your customers or the people that are your investors. You need to know your donors and to know them very well. You also need to create an attractive brand. You need to make sure that people, they want to be associated with you. So you need to think, how do I make sure that I build the reputation so people, because of their urge to be associated with us, they're gonna donate to us. And then you need to create a mission with impact differentiated. And for this one, I think the connection is like the business model. So like in the case of the private sector, if you're thinking more of or something in the private sector, you need to make sure that you're creating a value that is so differentiated that nobody else can offer what you're offering. So in the terms of nonprofit, like the first step to make sure that people are gonna be donating to you is to create this great organization. The other aspect is your pitch, which you also need in any sector to do fundraising. In the nonprofit sector, there is this model that I truly love and recommend, but because it focuses on 3 elements. When I go to talk to a fundraiser, and I'm talking, some of them are asking them 300K USD. Like I really need to have the best pitch to make sure that when I leave that meeting, that person is gonna tell me, I'm gonna donate this big amount of money to you. And there are 3 elements that I use. The story of self. I think it's so important to make sure that people understand the reason why you're doing what you're doing. Like, why are you leading that organization? What are the elements of your life that connect with the reason of why you're focusing on doing the job or like pushing that entrepreneurial idea? The other aspect is the story of now. Like, why is so important for you to give me the money right now and not tomorrow? Like, I need it right now. So you need to make sure that you express this urgency and that the donor or the investors can see that need and the urgency. And the story of us, like, why is so important that we do this together? Why can I not do it by myself? And what are the achievements that we have gotten as an organization? For example, in the story of now, I focus more on sharing them. How as a community, we have impacted many students. We have developed the leadership of many fellows. So that are the elements that I focus on. And I truly recommend this for any sector, because definitely I see some comparisons of when many of my friends are focused on fundraising for their private organizations. I true that you could benefit by taking these elements and putting them in your pitch for any endeavor. And that is one of the elements that I wanted to focus on, like as an entrepreneur, if having a great pitch is gonna help you to fundraise the money that you need for your organization. The other element that I want to focus and highlight that is very hard in the social sector, in the nonprofit sector, is attracting and retaining the best talent. In a nonprofit, you have limited financial resources. So you have to think of how you can create a strong intrinsic motivations to attract and retain the best talent. Of course, you cannot compete with money because many of the donors don't see this a good thing, that you pay high salaries in the nonprofit sector. That is unheard of. So you need to be creative on what are the elements that you can build in your organization to attract and retain the best talent. I have 3 tips to share with you. And one of the main ones, and I mentioned before, but I'm going to focus more on the element of the talent, is mission and vision alignment. You need to make sure that the people that are joining your organization truly align with what you're trying to achieve. And something that the way that I usually do this is to ask them what are the personal elements of their life, why they want to join Teach for Mexico. For me, it's so important to hear these elements, because if there is not something very strong that is calling you to do something in education, as soon as you find the challenges, and the education sector is very challenging, you're gonna run away because someone else is gonna give you a better offer money-wise, and you're gonna leave me. So I need to make sure that you are going to be in education and you wanna be in education because of very strong personal aspects. And the second aspect is organizational culture. What is the culture that you can develop to make sure that even these people that want to work in the nonprofit sector, in the education sector, don't go to another nonprofit because they don't feel that you're giving them what they want in your organization. And the best way to retain talent in my aspect is to develop this great organizational culture. And in Teach for Mexico, we focus on 4 elements. We have learned that if people are always learning, they're gonna be more engaged with your organization, and they will wanna stay there. The other aspect is the sense of possibility, allowing them to see that in Teach for Mexico together, we can go further and achieve things that might seem impossible. So making them believe that they're an important element of achieving these things that sometimes seem impossible, but they can do it if we work together. The other aspect is the sense of urgency, that we need to do it now. Like, we need them right now. We cannot wait till tomorrow. And it is very important that they give us their full energy to provide a better education and develop the community leadership that we want to develop. And the other aspect, you need to give them a sense of ownership. If people feel like they're the owners of something in your organization, they're going to develop the leadership that they need, but also they're going to be connected to your organization even more, because you're telling them you are the owner of this and you are the one that tells me what to do. For example, with my team, with my directors, that are, some of them report to me, but for different areas, I always tell them, for example, to the development director, I tell them, you are the boss for development. I'm not your boss. You are the person that needs to tell me what to do. So for me, that is an example to give him ownership. Like, even though on paper I'm their boss, I act like their employee for whatever they ask me to do for that specific element of the organization. And I think people appreciate that a lot. And the last one is being an empathetic and humane leader. Leader is one of the elements that people are always going to be facing strong challenges. So to be able to put yourself in the shoes, to constantly ask them how you're doing, not only focus on the goals of the organization, but also telling them what is going on in your life, how can I help you, I think allows you to create that bond with people. So they're not only there for what Enseña por Mexico is trying to do, which is the mission and the vision, but also because they have developed a strong, genuine relationship with you. So those are the elements that I will share that are required to attract and retain the best talent. And I think many of them can be applicable to any sector And right now I put to you, like over here on the right, I put to you, like I have a staff of 45 people and 225 fellows, but I put the annual salary over here as a reference. So for you to know, like, I cannot compete on salaries, like I cannot pay over hundreds of thousands of dollars to people or fellows. So this is why it's so important for me to develop the other elements to attract them and to retain them. And then the last one element which is needed once you develop a nonprofit and you start to get in big investments, in the case of Enseña por México is donation, the people are going to ask, who are you reporting to? Like who makes sure that you're managing the resources the right way? And so this is the reason why you need to build a strong board. But at the same time, there are many other benefits that a good board can give to you. In the terms of a nonprofit, it gives a strong reputation, who you choose to be on your board. And they can help you to achieve your fundraising goals. At the same time, the board, you need to be very strategic because you need to find the elements of what is needed in your organization and find the experts out there that will be willing to give you their time to make sure that you become the best on that particular area. So that is like the way that I think about my board. Like every time if someone wants to leave the board and I'm looking for a new board member, I'm always trying to analyze what is needed at Teach for Mexico right now, organizational wise, so I can find that person that is known to be one of the best in that area, so they can help me to create this. And then the third element is the governance model. They allow you to remember one of the things that I told you that I confront in Mexico is that there is a lot of mistrust in nonprofits. So a strong board allows you to build the processes and policies that you need to make sure that people can see you as a trustworthy organization. And then the last element is more from me to the board members, is like you need to make sure that you have clear expectations with them. Like what are you expecting them to help you with? And this is something that I always do when I'm like talking to a new board member or the ones that are currently in the board. And sometimes it's intimidating because many of these individuals, in the case of Teach for Mexico, are the presidents or the CEOs of the biggest banks of Mexico, the biggest organizations in Mexico. And it's intimidating because you're coming to talk to this person that is there to help you and you're telling them, hey, I need you to help me with ABC. But it's so important to tell them and be clear of what is expected of them, and also tell them what do you expect of me, because that allows you to, again, go into the aspect of relationships, to build a very strong relationship with them. So when you are in the need of something very important, they can help you. And so that was the last element that I wanted to share. But to finish, and to open for questions and to hear like your reactions or anything, I really want to share with you one of the best tech talks for me, because of course I work in the nonprofit sector, but it's a tech talk by Dan Pallotta. And many of the ideas that he mentions, I think, are right on, because he mentioned how much difficult is to lead a nonprofit. But also the reason why we need nonprofits. Like we cannot just focus on thinking that the private sector can solve or the public sector can solve those problems. But I think I want to focus on the 5 different areas that he mentioned of why the way we think about charity or nonprofit is wrong. For example, it's like the element of compensation. We believe that a person leading a nonprofit shouldn't make, not even just leading, people working in a nonprofit shouldn't make as much money. And why is that? Why cannot just pay someone a very good salary if they're top talent and they want to work with you? The other aspect is advertising and marketing. If you do a lot of donors get bothered if you invest in marketing in nonprofit, but like how are people are gonna know your brand if you're not gonna do marketing and share it? So like that is the other element that he mentioned about risk or pursuing new ideas. In many donors, they want to see the results in the short-term side, but like sometimes you want to take risks. For example, it ended up working for us, but the early childhood program was a risk that we took because we had never done it. But in the nonprofit sector, sometimes it's hard to take this risk because a lot of people are gonna want to see the results in the short term. The other aspect, the time that is required to see the results in the nonprofit, again, it relates to that point that I was just talking about, is shorter. For example, many companies in the private sector take years to become profitable, and nobody cares about that. In the nonprofit sector, people want the results right now, and you cannot take years to see the results. It is seen as a bad thing. So that's the other aspect. And the other element is profit. Like, it is a nonprofit, the name says it itself, but if you're doing profit in a nonprofit, I mean, it loses the name, but it looks very bad. But why cannot just like do it and reinvest that profit and do things? But like at the end of the day, I really recommend this talk. Is 17 minutes. And it will give you a perspective if you're thinking about leading a social organization or a nonprofit, like the elements of differences between the private sector and the nonprofit sector. And it is important that you are aware of this because it allows you to like create solutions so you can become a better nonprofit sector, even though there are many challenges out there that put you in a different bucket. But that is what I wanted to share with you with my presentation. And at the end of the day, I want to leave you with this phrase that it is our responsibility to leave the world better than we found it. The world changes with our actions. And I truly, truly hope many of the students here listening today are planning to start a nonprofit or a social organization, because we live in a world what is truly needed. There are many problems that need to be fixed now. Speaking of the sense of urgency, we cannot wait till tomorrow. Climate change, social with race issues, education issues. Please, I really hope that you come and join me in the social sector and decide to join a social organization. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, sir. That was truly a very, very incredible, informative, and a mind-boggling presentation. It was really, really amazing, sir. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
So we have one of our faculty members, Professor Maheshwaran, who's been looking forward to interact with you, sir. But before I hand over the stage to Professor Maheshwaran, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our esteemed speaker, Dr. Luke Pitway. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. A very good evening.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. I look forward to presenting and hopefully having some good questions.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir. On this note, I would like to hand over the platform to Professor Maheshwaran, sir. Sir.
Hola, estimado señor Juan Manuel Gonzalez.
Hola, mucho gusto.
Perdona porque estoy en platicar en la conferencia congresa en el madrugada, pero en el México es en el madrugada, ¿sí? Y ahora en tardes, perdona. ¿Y cómo estás?
Muy bien, muchas gracias por invitarme.
Muy bien. Primero en la introducción en mi universidad, porque hay una sorpresa que en un año hay 300 alumnos que aprenden español. Yo sé, hace 7 años enseño español por mis alumnos. Es orgulloso en la India. Y todo el mundo gustan aprender inglés, pero en la India hay muchas personas que gustan aprender español. ¿Y por qué? Español es la lengua en el mundo en el primer lugar. Y también me gusta México porque México es un país en el mundo. Hay personas que hablan español, millones 30, ¿sí? Millones 30 hablan español. Y también le gustan que México porque yo interacción con el Instituto Cultural de Guadalajara y también Tijuana y también Durango. Y me gusta en el clubes de fútbol de Alcatranes porque es en el Scorpion en el inglés. Y también ella soy el profesor de Guillermo en Argentina. Aprende en el 3 meses y también un poquito de español, por favor. Perdona en eso. Y hay dos preguntas para usted. En primer lugar, y antes, me gusta la camiseta de sus alumnos de enseñanza de México. Maravillosa, maravillosa. Sí. En mi primera pregunta, es que tienes que decirles con mis alumnos en practicar en inglés que cómo es importante es español y que en el marca en el emprendedor en el futuro. Esta es la primera pregunta. Y otra es mi segunda y última pregunta es, ¿hace que es posible que en el interacción, el intercambio en su país? Porque en la India no muchas personas practican español. Por mis alumnos en el futuro es el intercambio que en el platicar español es mi mucho gusto. Esas son las dos preguntas.
Perfect. I'll answer in English so people understand, but thank you so much, Professor, for speaking to me in Spanish. And
Thank you, sir.
I'm glad that there are many people in India that are learning Spanish, despite that probably there are not many countries surrounding you that speak Spanish. But like one of the first questions is like that the professor wanted me to highlight is the importance as an entrepreneur to speak Spanish, to learn Spanish. The Latin American market is one of the biggest markets in the world. So if you speak Spanish, I mean, there are two main languages, of course, Spanish and Portuguese, but the one that is dominated in Latin America is Spanish. So I truly, truly recommend as an entrepreneur, is gonna give you the opportunity to grow as a business if you're keeping in mind and if you know the language. If you come to this part of the world and you wanna do business and we see that you already know the language, speaking of the aspect of trust that I was highlighting in my presentation in relationships, if people can see that you're making the effort or you know already that language, it's gonna allow you to close businesses better, like close that deal than if you don't speak it. I'm not saying that it is a requirement, but it's gonna give you an opportunity to do that. And at the same time, the other element that the professor was mentioning, I really hope that you find the opportunities to come and do exchange programs in Mexico, in Colombia, in any of the like many countries that we have that are Spanish-speaking countries, but it will give you the perspective to learn more about our culture. And again, when you're thinking about your entrepreneurial ideas, you will have the different customer in mind, that when you're trying to enter this market, is gonna be easier for you. But like those were the two questions that we were talking for. I hope many of you were understanding Spanish, but if not, I'm here to tell you in English. Even though I have a heavy accent, I hope you can understand my English.
Thank you so much, sir. That interaction was indeed very interesting and very refreshing for all of us. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Maishwan, sir, for
Thank you, sir.
joining
Muchísimas
us.
gracias, Juan Manuel. Señor.
Gracias.
Yes,
So now I would like to take a few questions from our participants, sir. We have a first question from Ms. Samita. Have you taken the teaching outcomes of students to address research gaps in the pedagogy and for mapping futuristic educational practices in Mexico?
Yeah, some of the elements that we focus, where we have done a lot of more research about the outcomes of teaching in Teach for Mexico, has focused more on the social emotional aspect. So in 2017, we did a research about what is truly happening with the students that have a Teach for Mexico fellow teaching to them versus those that didn't. And we discovered that in terms of social emotional skills, we truly are like developing better than if they do not have access to one of our fellows. And one of them that, well, we highlight 4 of them, which is like self-efficacy, self-control, growth mindset, and social consciousness. I want to focus on the aspect of self-control and growth mindset, because something that we went forward with the pandemic right now is that we did an additional study. What happened to those students that we discovered that had developed better self-control and growth mindset during the pandemic? And something that was not a surprise to us, but like it was nice to have it on paper, was that they live a pandemic with less stress, and they were completed their school work better than those that had not developed those skills. And this connects with the second element about the futuristic approaches. It shouldn't be a future because we always needed the social emotional aspect, but I think we're now making sure, and I'm seeing already in the education sector in Mexico and around the world, the importance of the social emotional aspect. That before we care so much about making sure that the students got perfect grades in math, in English, in all the required subjects, but now we're focusing on making sure that there is a focus on well-being and developing the social emotional skills. So for me, that was one of the elements where we took the outcomes of what we were doing in the teaching field, and now thinking what we can connect it with something that is needed in the future and in everywhere. Like, think of all of you, how hard it is to live in this pandemic, and how important has been to think about self-control. How do you control those emotions so you don't consume them and you can focus on what you're doing? So I think it's something that is required. And unfortunately, I do believe that we're gonna continue to face more crises in the world. So we need to prepare students with those social emotional skills so they are prepared to confront these crises and challenges.
Well, sir, thank you so much for articulating it so well. And, you really answered the question in a way that all of us could understand. So the next question that I would like to take is from Mr. Gyanesh. How do you get rid of distractions, as it is turning out to be a major hindrance in achieving your goal?
It is like, I think you have to have, you first, and it connects with any entrepreneur. I do believe that the best entrepreneurs that I have known, you truly need to have a clear vision of what you want to achieve. And if you truly believe and have a clear vision of like this thing that you want to achieve, these challenges that are going to confront are going to be just that, challenges. They're going to be distractions, but you already know what is the end point of where you want to get. And that is one of the elements. And the other aspect that I truly believe is that personal aspect. The reason why I continue in the education sector, even though I can tell you it's way harder than being a management consultant. I used to think that being a consultant was hard. It is not. It is so much harder to be working in the education sector where resources are limited and you are trying to accomplish. So you need to have this element, in my case, for me in education, that truly connects with that vision that you want to achieve. I truly think of my mother every time because she didn't have the opportunity to learn to read and write for me. So that is the personal connection that if I don't continue to achieve that vision, I'm letting down a lot of people like my mother, that not because they didn't want to get access to education, they just didn't have the opportunity to have that access to education. So having that personal element that pushes you to go further is very important. So vision and having a personal connection with that vision are the elements that are needed to avoid those distractions.
Well, sir, thank you for again making it so easy for us to connect. And it was a we all could connect with the way you answered, sir. The last question for the session, sir, it was by Ms. Mule. What are the key challenges that social entrepreneurs encounter in developing countries, as many of those startups end up failing? What do you recommend, and what should the relationship with the stakeholders be?
So one of the main challenges, I think, it has to do with we have to change mindsets of people, and that is the hardest thing to do. And I think that is where I connected with the TED Talk that I put in the last slide that I presented. It is you confront the challenge of like changing the mindset of people of the results that you need to achieve. You need to achieve in the short-term things, results that are required by your investors and donors. But at the same time, if you want to survive, you always want to have a long-term vision. So always making sure that, because many of them, like you mentioned, are going to fail, because I think their problem was that they're always focused on the short term to fulfill what the mindset was telling them, what are these results in the short term. But if you're not thinking in the long term, as soon as a crisis like a pandemic shows up, or like a better social entrepreneur shows up, they're gonna push you to the side, and they're gonna replace you with a cooler idea that they saw and you didn't see because you were focusing in the short term. So like for me, is the importance of achieving those short-term results that are needed because the market is asking for those and the culture is asking for those, but not losing the long-term vision and always thinking, what is the next innovation here that I can do, and how can I start it to make sure that when these short-term results that I'm achieving are no longer enough, I can move on to the next thing. So that's one of the things that I will say. And the reason you don't survive is it has to do with that. Like having a short-term vision will in any sector will kick you out of the market.
Very well said, sir. Yes, sir. So thank you so much for clarifying our participants' queries through your in-depth knowledge, sir. Thank you once again. And this session was absolutely
Thank you so much.
mind-blowing. Thank you, sir. And I would like to hand over the platform to Professor Vaishaki.
Thank you, Dr. Abhishek.
Thank you, Juan.
And
Thank you, Juan.